Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. The next part in the chapter of Salah is Sutrat al-Musalli. You guys were asking lots about the sutra yesterday. So this is what we will discuss today, inshallah, the sutra, which is the barrier that a person is supposed to place between him and people who may pass in front of him while he's praying. The sutra, it's a sunnah, at least a sunnah mu'akkada, and some scholars like Imam al-Albani, like the author of this book, he's a student of Imam al-Albani, he says it is a fard, it's wajib for a person to put a sutra, but the vast majority of scholars say it's sunnah, it's not obligatory to put a sutra, but it's much better, and most of the time Prophet ﷺ did put a sutra, like a barrier, something to block between him and people who may want to pass between, like in front of him while he's praying. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. There's more than one hadith. إذا صلى أحدكم إلى سترة فليدن منها لا يقطع الشيطان عليه صلاته. And you have to also not make the distance between you and that barrier a big distance. You have to make it reasonable, just beyond the place of sujood. Okay. Also the hadith لا تصلوا إلا إلى سترة. Do not pray unless you have something in front of you. So this wording is a little bit more, that's why Imam al-Albani felt it was wajib, because he says here sutra wajiba على الإمام والمنفرد, and that's for the imam and the person praying alone, as we mentioned yesterday. لا تصلي إلا إلى سترة ولا تدع أحدا يمر بين يديك, and do not allow anyone to pass between you and that place or that barrier that you have set in front of you. You should actually prevent him as much as you can. فإن معه القرين. The reason is, he says فإن معه القرين, because with each person is his qarin, which is his companion of the jinn. This qarin is actually not qarin is like a demon, it's like a jinn, but not a righteous jinn, not like a good one. Because here the other hadith says لا يقطع الشيطان عليه صلاته. He called him here shaitan, and here he called him the qarin, and we know that al-qarin in general commands a person to do evil.
Bad influence.
Naam?
Bad influence.
Yeah, he had a bad influence. And when the Prophet ﷺ, when he said that ما منكم من أحد إلا ومعه قرينه من الجن, there's not a single human being that doesn't have this qarin, this companion of a demon or a jinn, that who has a bad influence on the person. And they said, ولا أنت يا رسول الله, even you? What's the continuation of the hadith? Does anybody know? نعم إلا أن الله أعان عليه فأسلم. He says even me, I have one of them as well, but Allah has allowed me to overpower him and gave me strength over him. فأسلم. فأسلم means that he also has embraced Islam, his own jinn has embraced Islam. Or فأسلم يعني فأسلم من شره. The Aslam here means that he cannot have a bad influence. فأسلم here could have two meanings. Either that he has embraced Islam and became just like the angel, only has a good influence, or فأسلم here فأسلم أنا منه, that I am protected from his evil whispering. That is the meaning. Okay. ذهب الجمهور إلى استحباب السترة. The ahadith are very clear. If you just take these two ahadith, you might say it's wajib. But there is a hadith of Ibn Abbas. He says أقبلت راكبا على حمار أتان وأنا يومئذ قد نهزت الاحتلام ورسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يصلي بالناس بمنى إلى غير جدار. The meaning is that I came riding my camel and I was almost near the age of puberty, and Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, I saw him praying, leading people in salah in Mina إلى غير جدار, and he was not praying, he had no wall in front of him, no barrier basically. Some people understood this, that he didn't have a wall in front of him, but maybe he had something else. But Ibn Abbas, when he said that he was not praying towards the wall, you can understand that he wants to tell us that he was not praying towards any barrier. There was no barrier in front of him at all. That is a more sound understanding. Otherwise, why would he mention that? Why would he mention he was not praying to a wall? Does he always pray towards the wall? There's not always a wall in front of him. But what he meant here, he was not praying towards a barrier. There was no barrier in front of him. Now, فَمَرَرْتُ بَيْنَ يَدَيْ بَعْدَ الصَّفْ. This hadith is important because he says, I passed between the lines. This shows that you can pass between the lines if you have to, not just because you want to, but if you absolutely have to. فَنَزَلْتُ وَأَرْسَلْتُ الْأَثَانَ تَرْتَعْ وَدَخَلْتُ الصَّفَّ لَمْ يُنْكَرْ ذَلِكَ أَحَدٌ. He says, and I passed between the lines and I found my place in the line, and no one criticized what I did. Now, and then we talked yesterday that the sutra should not be something that is, it should be something that's a little bit elevated. مؤخرة الرحل, like the backrest while somebody is sitting on a camel. So they say something يعني, at least like half or 2/3 of the arm. This is the elevation of the sutra. ثلثي الذراع. نعم. This is the height. As for the width of the sutra, the width could be as narrow as a rumh, a spear, because some other hadith indicate this is what the Prophet ﷺ did. He put the spear. So the height is important, had to be maybe 2/3 of an arm, but the width could be narrow, even a spear. As for the khat, I don't think the hadith is authentic. Some people said the hadith is batil لو تشوف فليخط خطا, and I really think even if the hadith is authentic, it's just like he's demarcating where his sujood is, but it cannot be considered as a sutra. Cannot consider a line as a sutra. Look and find for us this hadith فليخط خطا, if it is even authentic or not. Now, and the hadith that you know that a person should avoid passing between somebody and his sutra, or passing in general between a praying person and his place of sujood, at least. That's the very least. Some scholars say that even further, you should go even further. There's no specific determination of the distance that you're allowed to pass in front of somebody who's praying if you absolutely have to. Like if you don't have to, you don't pass. But if, let's say somebody just happened to be praying in the middle of the masjid and there's no way that we pass in front of him, we should try at least to go beyond his place of sujood. If we can go further, then that's fine. Shaykh al-Uthaymeen says the place of sujood. Some people said you have to be far away, but they didn't really give any specific measurement. They said tubna al-urf. You go back to what is customary known as you're far away from him. But I think this mawdu' al-sujood would be the very least. Naam. Three, yeah, and that's again a matter of judgment. Maybe some scholars felt it maybe this long, some people said shorter, but there's not a specific hadith on this matter. How we said فَلْيَدْنُ مِنْهَا, he should be close to the sutra. طب خلاص كده. لا شوف كده مثلا عندك البحث الحديثي.
ما في.
شوف البحث او موقع درر الثانية. نعم. كان بين مصلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وبين الجدار ممر الشاة. How much do you come close to the sutra? Between you and the sutra, it says here ممر الشاة, that a goat or a sheep can pass. Now it doesn't really clearly say if it is between him standing and the wall, or between his place of sujood and the wall should be mamar al-shah. But generally speaking, you don't have a long distance between yourself and that barrier. Now, this link that I sent you, Abdul Nasser, talks about the sutra in the Masjid al-Haram. Some scholars مثلا شعيب بن أرناؤوط قال في سنده مجهولان. Ibn Uthaymin قال إسناده حسن. يعني this hadith that he make a line, they've differed whether it is authentic or not. Okay, like if you can't find the sutra, you put a line. Some people said it's actually ضعيف. Imam al-Albani said it's ضعيف. So مضطرب. Imam al-Albani قال ضعيف. نعم. Just get us this link. في المسجد الحرام in Mecca, there might be some concession with regards to the sutra. Like for instance, Imam Ahmad says about the Masjid al-Haram, because of how crowded it is, we cannot really apply this. Let me see to tell you what Imam Ahmad said about this matter.
Security will not allow you to carry anything inside anyway.
نعم. ذهب الحنفية إلى أنه لا يمنع المار داخل المسجد الحرام. Imam Abu Hanifa said in the Masjid al-Haram you don't have to be strict with regards to people passing in front of you. Imam al-Malikiyya, Madhab al-Maliki said if there's any way that you can avoid, you should avoid, and that's a general rule. And you should avoid if you can. وإلا جاز, otherwise it's okay if you have to pass in front of somebody praying in al-Masjid al-Haram. Imam Ahmad said something similar to that. قال المصلى بمكة المشرفة لا يرد المار بين يديه. He said you should not stop somebody passing in front of you in the Masjid al-Haram. Now we have 3 imams here saying this, okay? Imam Ibn Baz, one of the more recent scholars, says أما المسجد الحرام فلا يحرم فيه المرور بين يدي المصلي ولا يقطع الصلاة فيه شيء. It says the same thing, that it's okay if you have to pass in front of somebody. Now
people will just bring their arm out and they will push.
No, and that's why we wanted to mention that. So in Masjid al-Haram, don't bother preventing people. They might even step on you while you're in sujood. But yesterday somebody asked me a question. I think my answer was not correct, which is the children. Let me see, the children. There's a couple of hadith on this matter. The children, it is not as serious a problem for a child to pass in front of you, but you still should try to prevent the child. There's a hadith in which one of the either the grandchildren or a little child wanted to pass in front of the Prophet ﷺ while he's praying. There was a boy and a girl playing, so he put his hand and prevented the boy. But then the girl, she actually came and pushed his hand, and she passed in front of him. After the salah, he smiled and he says, "Hunna aghlab," which means you can't stop them. Hunna means the female, the girl, he could not stop her. Also, there's a hadith regarding, because so if the child, if it's an adult, you should prevent them, right? Even if you strongly prevent them. فَلْيُقَاتِلْهُ means you prevent them with some kind of force even. Because he's committing a sin. As long as you've taken your precautions to prevent people from passing in front of you, praying towards a pole, or you have a barrier, you have the right to stop them, even with force. But a child, you stop gently, and if they insist on passing, you can allow them to pass. I think when I mentioned to you the fatwa,
What is the age for the child? Like 12?
little children, maybe the children we're talking about here were like 5 or 6, around this age.
I have heard the hadith where the grandchildren of Prophet Muhammad, they were playing while he was praying.
Yes.
Around and on him.
Yes.
How tried to stop him, he made them stop. He said, let them do what they're doing.
They used to ride his back when he's making sujood, and sometimes he would prolong the sujood, stay in the prostration for a longer time so they don't fall until they're done, and then they can come off his back, and then he would get up again. And sometimes he would carry them in the salah. Now, but we're now talking about whether passing or not. So you try to prevent, but don't make a big issue about it if they insist on passing. Now, I also mentioned that if it's an animal, I answered wrongly yesterday. An animal, even you have to try to. Like there's a hadith in which Prophet ﷺ, there was an animal wanting to pass. What he did is he moved forward close to the wall to allow the animal to pass behind him. So even the animals, we should try to avoid as much as we can an animal passing. And finally, I'll mention the hadith يقطع المصلي إذا كان بين يديه. There's a hadith in which I'd like to mention this hadith to you because some people misunderstand it. يقطع الصلاة المرأة والحمار والكلب ويقي ذلك مثل مؤخرة الرحم. Here the hadith says that specifically if a woman passes in front of you, or an animal like a donkey or a dog, like specifically talking about the donkey and the dog here, passes in front of you, it's you should try to avoid this even more than any other person passing in front of you. Now, يقطع means, let me see how they explained it here. مرور الكلب والحمار والمرأة لا يقطع الصلاة. أما القطع الذي جاء في الحديث هو قطع الخشوع للانشغال بهذه الأشياء. It says it may affect the khushu' because the hadith says يقطع means it cuts the salah. Some people understood it that it annuls the salah, invalidates the salah. According to how Imam Malik and Abu Hanifa and Shafi'i and others understood it, it is not like it basically cancels your salah. No, it diminishes the khushu' in the salah. Okay. طبعا this hadith, some people may misunderstand. Oh, it says, oh, you're associating women with dogs and donkeys. So I've been asked this question, but this is not what the hadith is talking about. Generally speaking, no, seriously, generally speaking, yani if you, yani if a man is praying and a woman is passing in front of him, don't you think that will affect his, distract him more than if a man passes in front of him? It just makes sense. So, and also we know that, for instance, the dog, we have certain rulings regarding the dog that we're worried about najasa, right? So if, of course, if a dog passes in front of you, you will continue thinking, oh, did he affect my wudu? Did he affect the place or not? And the same for the himar as well, because the himar as well, the saliva of the himar is also considered najis. وَنَهِيقُ الْحِمَار, you know the association that we have in our sharia between the donkey and also shaitan. If you heard the nahiq of the himar, the sound of the donkey, فَقَدْ رَأَى شَيْطَانًا. So there are certain associations that we have, the donkey and the shaitan, and its saliva is not pure in our religion. And also the dog, its saliva, it's impure, it's considered unclean. And if it comes on your clothing, you would have to wash it. You cannot pray with any kind of drops of saliva of a donkey or a dog on you. That is why you will definitely start thinking too much, and that will affect the khushu'. But the fact that the hadith mentioned a woman, because this is a different kind of distraction. A man would be more distracted by a woman passing in front of him than he would be affected by a man passing in front of him. Now,
what about things like insects?
No, there's nothing mentioned about.
In our countries, in tropical countries, we have lizards, running around the walls and stuff.
I don't know if anybody asked this question before. And I think if I see a lizard or a snake, I will not be praying there.
There was a guy who was standing, like many years back, he was just standing at the entrance door of the masjid.
Mm-hmm.
And he was late, so he was continuing his salah.
Yes.
He was completing it, while others who wanted
or passing in front of him.
No, like he was standing, the door was just behind, the person who wanted to go out was standing here. So during his salah, he took a few steps and he vacated the area for him to pass.
Okay.
Is that allowed? Like during his salah, he walked a few steps forward?
Oh yes, just like the Prophet ﷺ did for the animal to pass. Yes, and that shows you the importance of the sutra, that you should avoid people or anything passing in front of you. Because movement in salah for unnecessary causes you shouldn't be doing. Since he did this kind of movement, it shows the importance of nothing passing in front of you. Now, I think this covers the subject of the sutra. By the way, there's a difference between a woman passing in front of you and, for instance, your wife sitting in front of you while you are praying. That's okay, by the way. Sayyidah Aisha says, لقد رأيتني مضطجع على السرير فيجيء النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فيتوسط السرير فيصلي فأكره أن أسنحه أي أظهر له من قدامي وهو من قول سنحه فأنسل من قبل رجلي السرير حتى أنسل من لحافي. Basically the meaning is that she says that I used to be laying on the bed like this sideways, and the Prophet ﷺ, this is the direction of the Qibla, and of course his rooms were very small, right? There's not much space, so he would be praying and she could be laying on the bed just in front of him, and that is fine. We are talking about murur. What we are talking about is passing, not somebody sitting in front of you, okay? Not somebody sitting in front of you. Now, we'll stop here.
About Barier.
Now,
If we
human die, what about the Qarin? He will die or he will...
Oh, that's actually a good question. That's a good question. So he says if a human being dies, does the Qareen die? No. The Qareen has his own lifetime. Could be totally separate. And that is why this is how, Tahdir al-Arwah, what do you call that? When they say, oh, I'm going to call your ancestors now, hold hands and put some candles, and I will call your ancestors, the dead ancestors. What do you call that? It has a name in English.
Spirit calling?
No, it has actually a name. Maybe I'll remember it for you. But that's very common actually, even in the West. Somebody says, oh, I have an ability to call on those ancestors, and then what? No, try to find it out. Yeah. So what happens is, and they start hearing, maybe they hear a voice. And actually I heard a sheikh talking about something like this. It happened to him. He wanted to understand what was going on. So they said, he went to one of those meetings and settings, and they said, oh, we'll call your late father. And his father was with a big sheikh, and he was a scholar.
Veneration?
Yeah.
Veneration of the dead.
No, not veneration. It has another name, not veneration. But anyhow, what happens is, so some voice comes, it could be the jinn, and he starts talking about things that only that person knew. Some maybe situation that you had with your father or your mother that only you and her were, and she would tell you, remember that day we were in the room and you asked me this question and I answered you. So she brings certain things that only you and her would know, and that is how people get deceived, that actually the dead person is now, his spirit has come. No, it's not his spirit, it's actually this Qareen, this demon that was living with him, associating with him all the time, and knows more about him than you actually know about him. So this sheikh actually said he attended multiple sessions, and the demon or the jinn would speak in the same manner his father would speak. His father used to start his speech in a certain way, and he says for multiple nights I used to go and listen, and I think, is this real or what? Is this real or what? But then he said, it occurred to him. He says he knew his father was very knowledgeable, and so he says, I'm going to start asking him very intricate and very deep questions in Sharia. So when he started asking him these questions, which he knew his father would answer very easily, the jinn, of course, is not interested in knowing all these things. So that is when he started making all these mistakes. Yes, but from the outward picture, he could get the simple, superficial stuff that resembles that deceased person. Now,
so Qareen will live long life. They have long life.
They probably have a longer life than a human being himself. Now, but we don't know exactly how long. Now,
he controls you even after once you get your wife, or
before you get your wife. What?
After you get a wife, who has a better control?
Well, after you get married, it's the Qareen of the wife. Qareen of the wife controls both of you. Huh?
Ufufali or something like that?
I wish I can get it. Divination. It's called divination. Is it called divination?
No.
No?
I don't know.
There is a word for it.
There is a word for it. Yes.
They show it in the movies all the time.
Yes. It's actually the Qareen, and it could be very deceiving.
You say when you enter home right now,
Yes.
he will stay outside.
If you say Bismillah.
Yes.
Yes. If
That Qareen or any shaitan?
no, that's in shayateen in general. But no, I think the Qareen is with the person all the time.
Oh.
Yes.
Still, if I say Bismillah, still he will come with me?
The Qareen is with you all the time. Yeah, no. Even in the Salah, he will be with you.
Sheikh, did you meet
You don't
your
know
Qareen?
about Adhan? Nothing?
No, I think the Qareen is always with you because it says يجري من ابن آدم مجرى الدم. It flows even within your veins. Now, yeah, that one specifically I think is with the human being at all times. All times. Now,
Is he actually inside of you or outside with you?
No. Yeah, we cannot say it this way because he's not made of physical matter like us. The demon is not made of physical matter like us. That is why I can't tell you location wise where he is. Okay? Yeah.